Yes, you can get below the mandatory minimum in a case where there's a mandatory minimum sentence. There are a couple ways to do that, but the easiest way to do it is by way of something we call safety valve. So if you're charged in a case, let's say a distribution of methamphetamine, more than 50 grams, and you have a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years. That's right, mandatory. So that means the judge cannot go below 10 years unless you are safety valve eligible. So what does that mean? So there's a statute and there's a sentencing guidelines section that both talk about this. Safety valve means that you have less than 4 criminal history points, which I'll explain. You were not a leader or an organizer or a manager in the offense. You weren't telling people what to do. You weren't the head honcho. And there was no violence. There were no guns. Nobody was injured. And you have a meeting with the U.S. Attorney's Office where you go in and you tell them everything that you know about the case. This is different than cooperation. You're not telling them about anyone else, and no one gets to see this report. This report is written by the FBI agent, and then they stick it in their file, and that's the end of it. But they want you to come in and come clean and say, yes, I did this. And it's separate from the plea hearing where you do the same thing. You say, yes, I did this. But you go in, they'll ask you some questions. It's usually very informal. It's in a conference room in the U.S. Attorney's Office with the U.S. Attorney and the agents. I have done a few via Zoom in the last couple of years. So it is a very informal setting where you just go in and you talk to them. And so those are the 4 requirements: that you have less than 4 criminal history points, you are not a leader, organizer, or manager, you have gone in and you have talked to them, and there was no violence or no serious bodily injury involved in the offense. I think that also sex crimes are not affected by safety valve. And I think that's one of the exclusions in the safety valve statute. So that's unfortunate because there are mandatory minimums in those cases as well, some of them quite serious. So what is your criminal history? So in the federal sentencing guidelines chart, the top of the chart is your criminal history category. Every offense, if you have any criminal prior convictions, depending on how many months you spent in custody, if any, you get a certain number of points for each offense. Many offenses, anything less than 60 days, you get 1 criminal history point. Anything more than a year, you get 2 criminal history points. So there's a calculation that has to be done. Usually the probation officer does it because they have access to all of your priors, your rap sheet, the actual reports in some cases. Now, this doesn't apply if the case is more than 10 years old. So there is a washout period. So assuming you've had 1 DUI, then you're going to qualify for safety valve, and you're going to get 2 levels below whatever the guidelines are. So usually the guidelines are at the 10-year mark. You get 2 levels below the guidelines, and then you get 3 levels for acceptance of responsibility. And then if there's any other cooperation or downward variance, your sentence would go down from there. But that is essentially what safety valve is. In any case where there is a mandatory minimum, excluding sex cases, it's usually drug crimes, but not always. So be sure that you ask your attorney if you qualify for safety valve if there's a mandatory minimum in your case.